In the spring of 1874, deep in the folds of the Appalachian Mountains, the air carried a kind of silence that only mining country knew, where the trees stood heavy with coal dust and the birds didn't sing much anymore. The town of Clay Hollow sat pressed between ridges so steep they never saw full daylight. What sunlight did find its way through the mist only seemed to highlight how worn the place had become. Families here didn't come for beauty. They came because of what lay beneath, the veins of black stone that promised wages, however meager, to those desperate enough to dig for it. The coal company ruled everything, the land, the homes, even the church. Every board and beam of Clay Hollow carried their stamp, and every man who worked in the shafts owed them twice over by payday. Among those families was the Wainwrights. The father, Thomas Wainwright, had come from the Kanawha Valley with his wife Eliza and their 2 children, a boy of 16 named Henry and his younger sister Clara, barely 12. Thomas had worked coal since he was a boy himself, his lungs already sounding like gravel being poured down a tin chute. But Clara wasn't like the rest of them. There was something about her stillness. She didn't fidget, didn't chatter. When others laughed, she just watched, quiet and sharp-eyed, like she was seeing something the rest of them couldn't. Even the older miners would stop mid-conversation when she walked by, unnerved by the way her pale eyes seemed to look right through them. The Wainwrights' cabin sat closest to the tree line, just beyond where the company's landmarkers ended, thin wooden stakes that no one dared cross. The company claimed ownership of nearly every inch of those hills, but Thomas insisted the cabin stood on what his father had bought years before the coal men came. That argument would turn out to be the start of all their trouble. By late May, the company's foreman, a man named Josiah Pike, came riding up with 3 deputies and a paper in his hand. He didn't even bother dismounting. "You're squatting," Pike said flatly. "This cabin's on company ground." Thomas stood firm. "I've got deed papers in my chest says otherwise." Pike spat a dark streak of tobacco juice into the dirt. "That paper ain't worth the ink it's printed in. The company says it's theirs, it's theirs." Eliza came out onto the porch, wiping her hands on her apron, Clara standing behind her. Pike's eyes flicked up toward the girl, and for a moment his tone changed, hesitating, uncertain. "You keep that young'un away from the mine. You hear me?" No one understood why he said it. 2 days later, Thomas's tools went missing. His mule was found dead by the creek, throat slit. Then came the whispers, workers saying the Wainwrights were cursed, that strange lights were seen flickering near their cabin at night. Men swore they heard something humming from the woods, a sound like wind in a bottle, but lower, almost like a voice trying to crawl out of the earth. Clara never spoke of it, but she heard it too. One night, Henry found her standing barefoot in the yard, eyes open, staring into the tree line. He shook her by the shoulders and she blinked up at him, calm as a pond. "It's breathing," she whispered. "The hill's breathing again." By midsummer, tension in Clay Hollow was like kindling waiting for a spark. The company had started blasting new tunnels beneath the ridge, closer and closer to where the Wainwright cabin stood. The ground began to tremble at odd hours, and cracks spread along the walls like veins of black marble. Thomas stormed into Pike's office one morning, furious. "You're undermining my land. You'll bring my house down." Pike didn't even look up from his ledger. "Then move your house." That night, the Wainwrights woke to the sound of a wagon outside. Someone was dumping coal slag against their porch, laughing as they rode away. In the morning, Eliza found a note pinned to the door. It said simply, "Leave or be buried." But Thomas wouldn't back down. He'd fought through famine and floods, and he wasn't about to be scared off by a company man. He took his shotgun down from the wall and started keeping it loaded. On the 3rd night after that note appeared, they came. It was past midnight when the dog started barking, low, throaty growls that rolled through the fog. Henry looked out through a crack in the shutter and saw shapes moving in the dark, 5 or 6 men carrying lanterns. Thomas opened the door, shotgun in hand. "You best turn around," he shouted. A voice answered, slurred and mean. "Ain't your ground no more, Wainwright?" Then the first shot rang out. The air split with the sound of gunfire and splintering wood. Eliza screamed, dragging Clara down behind the table. Henry tried to reach for his father, but Thomas had already stepped out into the yard, firing into the dark. Lanterns swung wildly, then crashed to the ground, spilling fire into the grass. By the time the smoke cleared, 2 men lay bleeding in the mud. Thomas was one of them. The others fled, leaving the house half-burned and the family in ruin. Sheriff Abel Collins rode out from town at dawn. He found Clara sitting on the porch steps, her face streaked with soot, her dress torn. She wasn't crying. She just stared at the horizon like she was waiting for something to arrive. The sheriff took down statements, but something about the girl unsettled him. When he asked what happened, she said quietly, "They fell before the shots." He frowned. "Fell before?" She nodded. "They fell like they were pushed from inside." Collins chalked it up to shock, but when he examined the bodies he found something strange. The 2 dead men, miners by the look of them, had no bullet wounds on their backs, no exit marks. Their chests were crushed inward, as though something had imploded from beneath the ribs. The coroner called it compression trauma. Collins called it impossible. Rumors spread fast. Some said Clara had called the mountain down on them, that she'd whispered something right before the blast that followed. Others swore they saw the ground heave, like something moving beneath it. The company wasted no time. Pike declared the cabin condemned, claiming it sat over a subsidence hazard. He sent men with torches to tear down what was left. But when they got there, they found the walls blackened, yet still standing, and the air around it humming faintly like a low, steady vibration underfoot. Clara and her mother were taken to stay with a neighbor, though no one volunteered to host them. The miners' wives crossed themselves when the girl walked by. Children whispered that she talked to the earth, that she could feel the coal veins pulsing beneath her feet. Weeks passed. The investigation into the shootout went nowhere. The company men were buried in unmarked graves. Thomas was laid to rest under a maple tree near the ridge. And Clara, she began to change. She stopped sleeping indoors, spending nights instead on the porch or by the edge of the woods, sitting perfectly still. When Eliza tried to bring her inside, she'd say softly, "He's still down there." "I can hear him." Eliza thought she meant her father. But Clara's voice was different when she said it, flat, certain, almost reverent. One evening, Sheriff Collins came to check in. He found Clara alone, humming to herself, a strange rhythm that seemed to echo faintly off the hills. He asked what she was singing. "It's not a song," she said. "It's the sound the ground makes when it's hungry." Collins laughed nervously, told her to mind her mother. But that night, as he rode back to town, his horse refused to cross a narrow stretch near the old mine road. The ground there was trembling, not from blasting, but from something slower, deeper. By autumn, Clay Hollow had changed. Men were leaving, frightened by talk of the hill breathing. The mine foreman Pike went missing. His horse was found wandering near the ridge, saddle twisted, reins snapped. When they searched for him, they found the mouth of a newly collapsed tunnel, one that hadn't been there the day before. At its center lay a hole, round and black as pitch. No one could see the bottom. Clara stood by the rim, calm as ever. "It opened because he went too deep," she said. "You can't dig where something's already sleeping." The company declared the area unsafe and sealed the shaft, nailing boards across it. But miners working elsewhere began to report new sounds, muffled thuds, echoing knocks, and sometimes a voice that whispered their names through the vents. Eliza begged the sheriff to move them away from Clay Hollow, but Clara refused. She said the hill wouldn't let her leave. "It remembers," she whispered. "It keeps what's taken." One night, heavy rains came down from the mountains. The creek swelled, washing out roads and mine carts. The old Wainwright cabin, still standing despite everything, was struck by lightning. By morning, it was gone. Only the stone hearth left behind, smoke rising from the wet ash. Sheriff Collins led a search, fearing Clara and her mother were inside. They weren't. Tracks led into the woods, 2 sets. One small, one larger, but halfway up the ridge. They simply stopped. The sheriff spent days combing the hills, but the forest gave nothing back. Winter came early that year, and by the time the thaw returned, the company had abandoned Clay Hollow altogether. The mines were sealed, the houses left to rot. Travelers passing through said they heard strange noises from the hills at night, like a heartbeat deep underground. In 1876, a government survey team mapped the area. On their second day, one of the men fell into a sinkhole near the old mine ridge. When they pulled him out, he was shaking and white as chalk. He swore he'd seen a face in the rock below, a girl's face, eyes open, lips moving, whispering something he couldn't understand. The official report made no mention of it. But one note, scrawled in the margin of the foreman's logbook, read, "The hill is hollow. The Wainwright claim sits above something alive." Decades later, when the land was resurveyed for mining again, the new engineers drilled test shafts through the ridge. Every borehole came up dry, but in each core sample they found traces of coal mixed with something else, a fine white dust that shimmered faintly, like crushed bone. Locals said the Wainwrights never left, that if you stand at the edge of the old mine road at dusk, you can still hear Clara humming. The mountain didn't forget. Even after the miners packed their gear and the last carts rolled away down the muddy road, the ridge above Clay Hollow seemed to breathe slower, heavier, as though it was waiting. The cabins fell silent. Wind whistled through broken shutters, and black vines crept up the walls like veins. For a few years, nothing stirred. Locals avoided the place. Hunters said their dogs refused to go near the ridge, whining and pulling away. Those who did venture close came back pale, saying they'd heard tapping from underground, like someone knocking, patient and deliberate. By 1878, talk of reopening the mine surfaced again. The railroad had reached Charleston, and the demand for coal was rising fast. The company had changed names, new investors, new management, but the greed was the same. A young engineer named Franklin Hodge was sent to assess the abandoned site. He was 28, ambitious, and skeptical of superstition. "There's no curse," he said to his crew as they camped near the old Wainwright Ridge. "Just bad luck and bad engineering." That first night, Hodge found an old survey marker, bent iron stakes marking the boundary where Thomas Wainwright's land once stood. The tag still bore the faded stamp, T. Wainwright, 1872. He tucked it into his satchel, but the next morning his men found him sitting by the campfire before dawn, eyes wide, face gray with dust. He didn't move until they shook him. When he finally spoke, his voice was thin and cracked. "Did you hear her?" he asked. No one had heard anything but the wind. Hodge didn't finish his survey. He quit the job a week later, left West Virginia entirely, and never spoke about Clay Hollow again. His assistant wrote in the letter that Hodge had started waking at night, muttering in his sleep, saying over and over, "It's breathing again." That same year, a traveling preacher passed through the region, a man named Reverend Silas Grant. He claimed he'd been called by God to cleanse the mountains of ungodly remnants. He arrived in Clay Hollow with a small congregation, mostly families too poor to move elsewhere. They built a makeshift chapel from timber salvaged out of the old company store. Every sermon, Grant spoke about the hill. "The Lord buried a serpent in these mountains," he said, "and the miners cracked its spine open. He forbade anyone from digging, even planting, near the ridge. But curiosity has a way of gnawing at the living." A few of the older boys, sons of former miners, snuck out one night, daring each other to reach the sealed tunnel entrance. They took lanterns, laughing as they went. Only 2 came back. The survivors said they'd found the boards pulled aside, though no one had touched them. Inside, the air was still heavy as syrup. They'd gone maybe 30 feet in when the light began to dim, not from the oil burning out, but from something thicker in the air, like fog that swallowed flame. Then came the whisper. Not words exactly, more like a low vibration that made their ribs ache. One boy said he felt it in his teeth, like the world itself humming inside his skull. They ran before seeing where it came from. Reverend Grant sealed the entrance with stones and set crosses around the site. But he too changed afterward. His sermons grew erratic. He started referring to the child beneath, saying she would rise when the company's greed reached the marrow again. In the winter of 1879, Grant was found dead in his chapel, collapsed at the pulpit. No wound, no struggle, just a look on his face, something between awe and terror. His hands were black with coal dust, though no one had seen him anywhere near the mines. His followers left soon after. Clay Hollow fell back into silence. But the story didn't die. By the turn of the century, rail lines crisscrossed West Virginia. New generations of miners moved into forgotten towns, lured by company promises. Clay Hollow appeared again on maps, small faded letters beside a note. Untapped reserve, ridge seam. In 1902, a fresh team began drilling test shafts. Among them was an old-timer named Eli Harmon, who'd grown up hearing the Wainwright story. He tried to warn the foreman, saying the ground up there was bad earth. The foreman laughed. Bad earth makes good coal. On their second week, they hit an air pocket. The drill shuddered violently, then snapped. When they pulled the bit up, it came coated in something thick and reddish. Not clay, not water. They stopped for the day. That night, Harmon woke to find his tent floor trembling slightly, dust sifting down from the rafters. Outside, the ridge glowed faintly as though moonlight was leaking from underground. He watched, frozen, as a thin crack split across the slope, exhaling a pale mist that smelled like iron and wet stone. By morning, half the camp was gone, equipment overturned, food scattered, horses missing. The company called it an accident, a cave-in caused by unstable rock. They sealed off Clay Hollow once more. Still, the miners who survived said they saw her. They spoke of a girl, maybe 12, standing just beyond the mist, her eyes the color of coal fire. She said nothing. She only watched. One man swore she was humming, years blurred into decades. The mine remained sealed through the wars, through floods, through the rise and fall of entire towns around it. Clay Hollow became a name whispered in bars, a cautionary tale for those who thought mountains were just piles of rock and profit. Then came 1934, a record drought year. Fires swept through parts of Appalachia, clearing brush and exposing forgotten ground. A geological team sent by the state stumbled upon the ridge once again. Among them was a young researcher named Eleanor Givens. She wasn't from the mountains, Boston-born, sharp-minded, practical. When locals warned her about the hollow, she smiled politely. "Every superstition has a root in science," she said. "I'll find it." Her notes, preserved in the state archives, tell the rest. On June 2nd, she and 3 assistants began mapping the ridge. They discovered faint vibrations emanating from beneath, steady pulses, repeating every 11 seconds. At first, they assumed it was seismic activity, but no quakes registered anywhere nearby. On June 3rd, Eleanor wrote, There's a rhythmic resonance in the ground, unlike any natural tremor. Almost like breath. Locals won't come near. One woman, descendant of a Wainwright, warned us the child still listens. That night, the team camped near the old Wainwright hearthstone, still visible through weeds. One assistant, Peter Lawson, described hearing soft singing around 3 a.m., a high, clear voice carrying no words. He thought it was a prank until he saw Eleanor standing outside her tent, barefoot, staring at the ridge. She turned to him and said quietly, "It's under pressure. The hill is full of lungs." Lawson said her eyes looked different, dilated, unfocused, as if seeing something through the earth. He guided her back inside, but she didn't sleep. By morning, 2 sets of footprints, hers and smaller ones, were found leading into the woods. The smaller print stopped abruptly at a patch of bare soil, smooth and sunken, like something pressed down from below. June 4th entry, final page. We heard the hum again, louder this time. Equipment picked up subharmonics below audible range, consistent, patterned. Feel intentional. I think the mountain remembers what was done to it. Thomas Eliza Clara. The pressure never left. The pages end there. The state recorded their disappearance as environmental hazard, sinkhole collapse. No remains recovered. After that, Clay Hollow vanished from official records. Locals reclaimed the forest, and by mid-century, few even knew a town had existed there. But every so often, hikers or surveyors would wander close and report the same thing. A faint hum rising from the ground, steady and low like something sleeping far below. In 1961, a new highway was proposed to cut through the ridge. Bulldozers arrived, carving through brush and shale. The project lasted less than a week. Workers complained of constant static in their radios, tools vibrating off tables and voices, female, distant, bleeding through their CB lines at night. On the 7th day, a small landslide buried one of the machines. When they dug it out, the metal frame had warped inward, as if squeezed by impossible force. No explanation was ever found. The highway was rerouted. One old miner, still alive from the 1902 crew, summed it up simply. "You can't dig where the hill breathes. It ain't right." By the 1980s, the area had become a ghost region, dense forest reclaiming old roads, streams black with iron runoff. Yet stories persisted. Campers claimed to hear a girl humming near the creek. Some said if you left a lantern burning, it would flicker 3 times and go out, just before the earth gave a low sigh. Modern scientists dismiss it as methane pockets venting through abandoned shafts. But others who've gone looking, geologists, thrill-seekers, historians, report the same unease. Compass needles spin. Audio recorders pick up faint, rhythmic pulses, almost like a heartbeat beneath static, and always, somewhere in the background, a child's voice. In 2019, drone footage surfaced online, an amateur exploration of forgotten mines of Appalachia. Around the 5-minute mark, the drone camera glides over a dark ridge. For a split second, a shape appears among the trees, small, pale, unmoving. The feed distorts, audio cutting out. When sound returns, there's a low hum, steady, rising, almost human. The uploader deleted the video within hours. But copies circulate, grainy and half-muted. Locals who watch it say they recognize the spot. The old Wainwright land. No one goes there now. Some nights, when the air is heavy and still, residents of the nearest town, 30 miles off, claim to feel the ground tremble, subtle but rhythmic. Miners' descendants say it's just the earth settling. But the oldest families know better. They say the hill is waiting, the way lungs wait before the next breath. And if you ever find yourself driving through West Virginia, along the back roads where fog swallows the treetops and the air smells faintly, of coal and rain. Roll down your window and listen. You might hear the hum, and if you do, don't stop, because somewhere under those Appalachian hills, the Wainwright girl is still listening, and the hill still remembers what was done to it. Years passed, and time did what it always does. It covered everything with dust and denial. The world outside moved forward. Factories roared, cities grew, and coal barons turned into industrial kings. But the ridge above Clay Hollow stayed quiet, too quiet. In 1978, the state commissioned a geological survey of abandoned mine regions. The government wanted to catalog unsafe sites, potential methane risks, anything that might threaten the new residential developments creeping up the valleys. Among the list sat a name that almost no one recognized anymore: Wainwright Ridge, Old Clay Hollow. A small team was assigned to inspect it, 3 men and 1 woman. Their notes were later recovered, water-stained and smudged, from a collapsed storage barn in Boone County. The log begins clean, practical, then descends into something different. June 11th, 1978. Field log. J. Barlow. Reached site at 3:14 p.m. Ridge stable. Surface soil dry, rocky. Some signs of old excavation. Area strangely quiet, no birds, no insects. Even our dogs stopped barking once we passed the tree line. June 12th. Camp established near remains of an old foundation. Found stone blocks and a hearth. Could be what's left of the Wainwright home the locals mentioned. Temperature drops at night, way lower than expected. Around 2 a.m., woke to a sound. Rhythmic. Like breathing through a flute made of stone. Not wind. Definitely not wind. They stayed only 3 nights. The last entry, scrawled sideways in the margins, reads, "The girl's voice isn't echoing anymore." It's closer. No one ever found the team's camp. Only their truck, abandoned 6 miles down the road. Keys still in the ignition. Radio hissing with static. That same summer, a retired coal engineer named Rufus Greeley, then 83 years old, gave an interview to a local paper. He'd worked the mines in his youth and claimed to have met a child who never aged. He told the reporter it was back in 14 after a cave-in. We'd lost 2 men, and I went back to mark the collapse site. I saw her sitting on a rock barefoot, humming. Looked 12, maybe 13. Thought she was one of the miners' daughters come looking for her pa. I said, "You shouldn't be here, sweetheart." She turned her head, slow, and looked me dead in the eyes. They were grey, flat grey like cold ash. And she said, I swear to God she said this, "You dug where you weren't meant to dig." Then she just faded, like smoke. The reporter laughed it off, printed it as Appalachian folklore, but Greeley refused to let it go. "You can laugh," he said, "but the hills got lungs, and that girl's their voice." No one paid attention. Then in 1989, a controlled mining blast miles away, at a completely different site, caused a shockwave that cracked open part of the Wainwright Ridge. Locals said the air filled with a smell like rust and damp cloth. When the dust cleared, an opening gaped in the side of the hill, jagged and wide enough for a man to crawl through. A local teenager named Billy Roan and 2 friends decided to explore it. They brought flashlights, a tape recorder, and a half bottle of bourbon. Billy's mother later said she'd begged him not to go, that she'd heard the earth moaning that afternoon. They went anyway. 2 hours later, only 1 boy came back, barefoot, shaking, covered in coal dust. His flashlight was melted plastic, twisted like wax. When the sheriff questioned him, he said, "We heard her. I thought it was an echo, but it wasn't. She was humming down there, real soft. Then she stopped, and the ground, it folded like it took a breath. Billy tried to run, but the tunnel moved. It moved. I saw the walls close like a throat swallowing." They searched for days, but no bodies were found. Only a patch of ground near the entrance, smooth as glass, faintly warm to the touch. The state sealed the area again with concrete. But people said that for months afterward, the ground would tremble gently at night. Not enough to topple things, just enough to make lanterns sway, and always there was that low hum. The locals had learned something by then. The hum always meant the ridge was breathing, and when it breathed, it remembered. By the mid-1990s, urban explorers and thrill-seekers began treating Clay Hollow like a legend, a challenge. The Wainwright haunting, they called it. Teenagers dared each other to camp there, to spend one night alone by the old creek bed. Most left before midnight. One group didn't. 3 college students from Morgantown, aspiring documentarians, filmed a trip there in 1996. Their footage, recovered later by park rangers, shows their drive up the valley, laughing, teasing each other about mountain ghosts. Then the tone shifts. The camera shakes as one of them whispers, "Listen, you hear that?" A faint, steady pulse fills the audio, low, too regular to be wind, too alive to be machinery. It gets louder as they move toward the ridge. One student mutters, "Feels like it's under my feet." The last minute of tape is nearly black. Just the sound of one voice whispering over and over, "It's humming my name." The rest is silence. Their car was found 2 days later, doors open, headlights still on. Inside, the windshield had fogged up from the inside, with 3 small handprints pressed into the glass. After that, the state fenced off the area entirely. But fences mean little in the hills. Hunters, campers, the occasional thrill-hungry traveler, they all still come. Some out of disbelief, some out of a strange need to see what the old stories are hiding. One of them was a park ranger named Dennis Lowe. He'd worked these woods for 15 years. Practical no-nonsense. In 2003, he was sent to investigate reports of illegal campers near the ridge. When he didn't return by dawn, a search party went looking. They found his truck parked by the old mine road, engine cold, driver's door open. Inside the cab was his field notebook. The last entry read, "Heard humming near creek bed." Child's voice. Sound came from below. Ground seems to move slightly when I stop walking. A week later, they found his flashlight on the ridge, lying beside a depression in the soil roughly the size of a small grave. Beneath it, nothing. No prints, no drag marks. Just smooth, compacted earth. His body was never found. After that, officials stopped sending anyone out there. Clay Hollow was marked on maps as restricted, unstable terrain, but people still talk. In nearby towns, Elkhurst, Ivydale, Glen, you'll find old folks who swear that. On certain nights, when the humidity's high and the fog hangs low, you can hear a child's voice echo through the valley. They say it doesn't sound sad or angry, just patient, waiting. A former mining inspector named Caleb Meyer moved to the region in 2011, drawn by the stories. He called them myth born from tragedy. But after living there 6 months, he changed his tune. In his personal journal, found later in his cabin after he vanished, he wrote, "The hum is constant now. I tried recording it, but it doesn't come through right. Like it slips under the microphone. Dogs refuse to come near the porch anymore. I think she's under the ridge again. Or maybe under all of us. Sometimes when I can't sleep, I swear I hear her breathing inside the walls. The air smells like coal again." The next morning, his neighbor found his house empty. His car was still there, keys on the table, lights off. On the window pane near the bed were 3 small smudges. Handprints again. But lower than a grown man's reach. They never found Caleb. Today, Clay Hollow is overgrown. Trees thick as pillars, moss covering what used to be foundations. The ridge still rises black and bare above the valley. And though it's been more than a century since anyone dug there, the hum has never stopped.